Most people don't struggle with communication because they lack words. They struggle because they lack certainty. They enter conversations already negotiating against themselves. They explain too much. They apologize too early. They speak fast, hoping to be understood instead of speaking clearly, expecting to be respected. Confidence in communication does not begin when you open your mouth. It begins before the conversation ever starts. It begins with the belief that what you have to say is valid, even if the other person disagrees. The moment you need approval to speak, confident communication is calm. It is measured. It does not rush to fill silence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is structure. When you pause before responding, you signal that you are thinking, not reacting. That pause changes the entire power dynamic of the conversation. People often mistake loudness for confidence. They think intensity equals authority. But true confidence does not need to dominate the room. It stabilizes it. When you speak steadily without emotional spikes, people listen differently. Your words land heavier because they are not wrapped in chaos. One of the fastest ways to lose confidence in a conversation is to argue from emotion instead of clarity. Emotion blurs your message. It pulls you into defending feelings instead of stating facts. Confidence means you can acknowledge emotion without being controlled by it. You can say what needs to be said without raising your voice or justifying your existence. Clarity is the backbone of confident communication. If your message is clear in your mind, it will be clear in your words. Most people overexplain because they are unsure of their position. They add details, examples, and disclaimers hoping one of them will convince the other person. But confidence says it once, clearly, and lets it stand. The way you pace your words matters more than the words themselves. Speaking too fast signals nervousness. Speaking too slow can feel rehearsed. Confident communication has rhythm. It allows space for ideas to breathe. It lets the listener process instead of overwhelm. Boundaries play a critical role in confident conversations. When you allow interruptions, dismissiveness, or disrespect, your words lose weight. Confidence is reinforced by what you tolerate. When you calmly stop an interruption or redirect a conversation, you demonstrate self-respect. And self-respect is persuasive. You do not need to win every conversation to communicate confidently. In fact, confidence often means letting go of the need to win. The goal is not domination. The goal is alignment and respect. You can disagree without becoming defensive. You can stand firm without becoming rigid. Confident communicators listen carefully, not to agree, not to counterattack, but to understand the direction of the conversation. Listening gives you information. Information gives you leverage. When you respond to what was actually said instead of what you assumed, your response becomes precise. Another key element of confidence is restraint. Just because you can respond does not mean you should. Choosing not to engage in every provocation is a sign of strength. Confidence is knowing when your silence speaks louder than your words. Your body communicates before you do. Posture, eye contact, and stillness send signals long before you speak. A grounded posture and relaxed presence reinforce your words. When your body is calm, your voice follows. Confidence also requires detachment from validation. If your self-worth depends on being understood, agreed with, or liked, your communication becomes fragile. Confident speakers are anchored internally. They speak from conviction, not reaction. They allow others to disagree without collapsing their sense of self. You will not master every conversation by controlling others. You master conversations by controlling yourself, your tone, your pace, your boundaries, your clarity. When those are aligned, your presence changes. Over time, people respond differently to you. They interrupt less. They listen more. Not because you demanded it, but because your communication trained them how to treat you. Confident communication is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with awareness and practice. Each conversation is an opportunity to refine it. Speak with intention. Pause with purpose. Set boundaries without anger. And remember this, when your words come from clarity instead of insecurity, they don't need to be loud to be powerful. That is the blueprint. Confidence is not about how loudly you speak or how much space you take up in a room. It is about the steadiness behind your words. Volume can demand attention, but certainty commands respect. When someone speaks with certainty, they do not need to overpower others. Their presence alone creates weight. People listen because something feels grounded, not because they are being forced to listen. Loudness is often mistaken for confidence because it is visible and immediate. But loudness can be a cover for insecurity. It tries to dominate before doubt has a chance to surface. Certainty, on the other hand, is quiet and controlled. It does not rush. It does not compete. It assumes its place. That assumption changes everything about how the message is received. Certainty begins internally. It starts with knowing what you believe and why you believe it. When your position is clear in your own mind, your delivery becomes calm. You are no longer searching for approval while speaking. You are simply expressing a conclusion you have already reached. That internal alignment shows up in your tone, your posture, and your pacing. When someone lacks certainty, their words tend to spill out quickly. They overexplain, they add disclaimers, they apologize for their opinions before they even share them. This behavior is not a lack of intelligence or preparation. It is a lack of trust in their own perspective. Volume sometimes enters as compensation, an attempt to drown out internal doubt. Certainty allows you to speak without urgency. You do not feel the need to convince everyone immediately. You are comfortable letting your words sit. You understand that not every message needs instant agreement to be valid. That patience communicates confidence more powerfully than raised voices ever could. In conversations, certainty changes the dynamic. When you speak calmly and clearly without emotional spikes, the other person adjusts to your pace. The room slows down, the energy stabilizes. Even disagreement becomes more productive because the focus stays on ideas rather than intensity. Certainty also shows in restraint. You do not respond to every challenge as a threat. You do not escalate when questioned. You welcome discussion because your confidence is not fragile. You can clarify without defending your worth. You can repeat your point without sounding reactive. That composure signals strength. People often raise their volume when they feel unheard. But being heard and being loud are not the same. Certainty improves how you are heard because it sharpens your message. When your words are precise, they cut through noise. They do not need to shout to be effective. Tone is one of the clearest indicators of certainty. A steady tone suggests self-control. A fluctuating tone often reveals internal conflict. When you believe in what you are saying, your voice naturally steadies. You are not trying to sell an idea, you are stating it. Body language reinforces this. Certainty shows up in stillness. Fidgeting, pacing, or exaggerated gestures can indicate nervous energy. A calm posture communicates that you are comfortable where you stand. You do not need to perform. You simply exist in your position. Certainty also changes how you handle silence. Silence does not intimidate confident communicators. They do not rush to fill gaps. They allow pauses to exist. Those pauses give their words more weight. Silence becomes part of the message, not an enemy to escape. This kind of confidence is especially powerful in conflict. When emotions rise, certainty acts as an anchor. You can acknowledge feelings without being swept away by them. You can restate your position without escalating. You do not need to win the moment to protect your credibility. Certainty does not mean stubbornness. You can be certain and still open to new information. In fact, true confidence allows flexibility. You are not threatened by being wrong because your identity is not tied to perfection. You are anchored in self-trust, not ego. Developing certainty requires reflection. You build it by understanding your values, your limits, and your priorities. When those are clear, decisions become easier. Communication becomes simpler. You speak from alignment instead of reaction. It is important to recognize that certainty is felt before it is heard. People sense it immediately. They respond differently to someone who speaks with grounded assurance. There is less interruption, less testing, less resistance. Not because the person is intimidating, but because they are stable. Volume can momentarily control a room. Certainty can lead it. Loud voices fade when the noise stops. Certain voices linger because they leave an impression. Confidence rooted in certainty is sustainable. It does not exhaust you. You are not constantly managing reactions or proving yourself. You conserve energy because you are not performing confidence, you are embodying it. When you speak from certainty, your words align with your actions. That alignment builds trust over time. People learn that when you speak, you mean it. There is no excess, no performance, just clarity. In the end, confidence is not measured in decibels. It is measured in steadiness. The calm voice that does not waver, the clear message that does not chase approval, and the presence that does not need permission. Certainty turns communication into authority, not by force, but by grounded self-belief. Every conversation is guided by two forces: emotion and intention. The one you allow to lead will determine the outcome. When emotions run unchecked, conversations drift, escalate, and collapse into misunderstanding. When emotions are regulated, conversations gain structure, clarity, and direction. That is why controlling your emotions must come before attempting to control the conversation. Emotions are not the enemy. They provide information. They signal discomfort, disagreement, excitement, or concern. But emotions are poor leaders when intensity is high. In moments of tension, emotions push for immediate release rather than long-term resolution. They urge you to react, to defend, to raise your voice, or to withdraw. Reaction feels satisfying in the moment, but it often costs you influence. When you enter a conversation emotionally charged, your tone shifts before you even realize it. Your words become sharper. Your pacing speeds up. Your body language tightens. Even if your points are valid, they are delivered in a way that invites resistance. The other person stops listening to the content and starts responding to the energy. The conversation becomes about tone instead of truth. Controlling your emotions does not mean suppressing them. Suppression builds pressure and eventually leaks out in unproductive ways. Emotional control is awareness and regulation. It is noticing the emotion, naming it internally, and choosing how to respond instead of letting the emotion choose for you. The moment you pause, you reclaim power. A brief pause slows your nervous system. It creates distance between what you feel and what you say. That distance is where intentional communication lives. Without it, conversations become impulsive exchanges rather than deliberate dialogue. Emotional regulation allows you to keep the conversation on track. When someone challenges you, dismisses you, or provokes you, your first impulse may be to push back emotionally. But emotional reactions often shift the focus away from the original issue. The conversation spirals into arguments about attitude, tone, or intent. Regulation keeps the discussion anchored to substance. Calmness is a strategic advantage. It disarms escalation. When one person remains steady, it becomes harder for chaos to sustain itself. You set the emotional temperature of the room. Others may try to raise it, but if you do not match their intensity, the temperature eventually drops. When you control your emotions, your words gain precision. You choose language carefully. You avoid exaggeration. You speak in specifics rather than accusations. This increases credibility. People are more receptive to feedback delivered calmly than criticism delivered emotionally. Emotional control also protects your boundaries. When emotions take over, you may say things you do not mean or agree to things you later regret just to end discomfort. Regulation allows you to hold your position without hostility. You can say no without guilt. You can disagree without becoming defensive. Conversations are often lost not because of disagreement, but because of emotional mismanagement. A valid point delivered with frustration can be dismissed. A reasonable boundary expressed with anger can be resisted. Emotional control ensures that your message is not undermined by your delivery. Listening improves when emotions are regulated. Instead of planning your response while the other person speaks, you actually hear them. You gather information. You understand their perspective without surrendering your own. That understanding allows you to respond more effectively. Controlling your emotions also reduces the likelihood of manipulation. People who seek to dominate conversations often provoke emotional reactions to gain leverage. If you remain composed, their tactics lose power. They cannot redirect the focus to your reaction if there is none. Your body plays a role in emotional control. Slow breathing, relaxed shoulders, and steady eye contact signal calm to your nervous system. The body and mind influence each other. When you physically slow down, your emotions follow. It is important to accept that you will still feel emotion even when you are regulated. Calmness does not mean indifference. It means discipline. You feel the emotion without acting from it. That distinction separates reactive communication from intentional communication. Over time, emotional control builds confidence. You trust yourself to handle difficult conversations without losing composure. That trust reduces anxiety before conversations even begin. You enter discussions prepared rather than guarded. Control also earns respect. People notice when you remain calm under pressure. They may not agree with you, but they recognize your stability. Stability is persuasive. It signals leadership. There will be moments when emotions spike despite your best efforts. Regulation is not perfection, it is recovery. Noticing the spike and recalibrating is part of the process. Even a brief reset can salvage a conversation. When you master your emotions, you master the pace of the conversation. You decide when to speak, when to pause, and when to disengage. You are no longer pulled into exchanges that drain you or derail your message. In the end, conversations are not controlled by force or cleverness. They are controlled by composure. When you regulate your emotions first, your words carry intention instead of impulse. And that composure turns communication into influence rather than conflict. In communication, clarity is power. Cleverness may impress for a moment, but clarity builds trust. When people understand you easily, they feel safe engaging with you. When they have to decode you, they hesitate. That hesitation weakens influence. This is why clarity beats cleverness every time. Cleverness often hides insecurity. People use complex language, layered metaphors, or sharp wit to appear intelligent or dominant. While this may earn short-term attention, it rarely earns long-term respect. Clarity, on the other hand, signals confidence. It says, I understand this well enough to explain it simply. That simplicity is not a lack of depth, it is mastery. When your message is clear, there is no confusion about your intent. The listener does not have to guess what you mean or where you stand, they know. That certainty reduces friction. Conversations move forward instead of looping back to clarify misunderstandings. Clever communication can create distance. It places the speaker above the listener, subtly saying, keep up if you can. Clarity removes that barrier. It invites engagement. It says, we're on the same level. People respond better when they feel included rather than impressed. In high-stakes conversations, cleverness is risky. Sarcasm, wordplay, or indirect language can be misinterpreted. The more emotional the situation, the less room there is for ambiguity. Clarity keeps conversations grounded. It ensures that what you intend to say is what is actually heard. Clarity also saves energy. Overly clever communication often requires explanation afterward. You end up rephrasing, justifying, or repairing misunderstandings. Clear communication reduces the need for cleanup. One clean statement is more efficient than 5 clever ones that require interpretation. People trust clear communicators. Trust is built when words match actions and intentions are obvious. When someone consistently communicates clearly, others know what to expect. Predictability builds credibility. Cleverness can feel unpredictable. It keeps people guessing. Guessing erodes trust. Clarity strengthens boundaries. When expectations are stated plainly, there is less room for manipulation or misinterpretation. Vague language invites negotiation. Clear language sets standards. This does not work for me is more effective than a clever hint that leaves room for denial. Clarity also improves listening. When you know your goal is to be understood, you listen more carefully. You respond directly instead of trying to outsmart the other person. The conversation becomes about resolution rather than performance. Cleverness often prioritizes the speaker's image. Clarity prioritizes the message. That shift matters. When the message comes first, communication becomes purposeful. You are not trying to win admiration. You are trying to convey truth. In professional environments, clarity is indispensable. Decisions depend on accurate understanding. Instructions must be followed. Goals must be aligned. Clever phrasing may sound impressive, but if it causes confusion, it costs time and resources. Clear communication prevents errors and builds efficiency. Emotionally, clarity provides stability. When messages are clear, anxiety decreases. People know where they stand. Uncertainty breeds stress. Clear communication reduces unnecessary emotional strain. Clarity does not mean bluntness. You can be clear and kind at the same time. Directness does not require harshness. It requires respect. Respect for yourself and respect for the listener's time and attention. Cleverness fades quickly. Once the moment passes, little remains. Clarity endures. People remember how you made things understandable. They remember the relief of not having to guess. That memory shapes how they view you long after the conversation ends. There is also humility in clarity. It acknowledges that communication is not about showing how smart you are, but about making sure understanding happens. That humility is attractive. It builds rapport. When conflict arises, clarity becomes even more important. Vague or clever language can escalate tension. Clear statements keep the conversation focused. They prevent emotional misfires caused by misinterpretation. Clarity requires preparation. You must know what you want to say before you say it. That preparation reflects discipline. Cleverness often relies on improvisation. While improvisation has its place, It should not replace intention. Over time, people gravitate toward clear communicators. They are easier to work with, easier to trust, easier to resolve issues with. Clarity creates ease, and ease creates influence. In a world full of noise, clarity cuts through. It does not compete for attention, it earns it. It respects the listener enough to speak plainly and the speaker enough to stand by their words. Ultimately, clarity wins because it serves the purpose of communication understanding. Cleverness may entertain, but clarity connects. And connection is what moves conversations forward, builds relationships, and establishes lasting credibility. Most people underestimate how much influence they have before they even choose their words. Pace and pauses shape how those words are received. They determine whether a message feels rushed or grounded, nervous or confident, forgettable or memorable. When used intentionally, pace and pauses become power tools that quietly control the flow of any conversation. Speaking too fast often signals urgency, anxiety, or a need for approval. It suggests that the speaker is trying to get through their point before being interrupted or dismissed. When words tumble over each other, clarity suffers. Listeners struggle to keep up, and important ideas lose their weight. Slowing your pace communicates confidence. It tells the listener that you are not afraid of silence and not worried about being heard. Pauses create space. That space allows ideas to land. When you pause after a key statement, you give the listener time to process. Processing leads to understanding, and understanding leads to influence. Without pauses, even the strongest message can blur into noise. Control of pace also controls emotional tone. Fast pacing can escalate tension, especially in disagreement. Slow, deliberate pacing calms the room. It lowers emotional temperature. When one person slows down, others often follow. That shift can turn a heated exchange into a productive conversation. Pauses are especially powerful after questions. Asking a question and then immediately filling the silence weakens its impact. A pause signals that you expect an answer. It places responsibility on the listener to respond. Silence becomes a subtle form of authority. Pacing also affects credibility. When you speak at a measured pace, your words feel considered. Listeners assume you have thought about what you are saying. Rapid speech can make even strong points sound uncertain. Calm pacing reinforces the idea that you stand behind your message. In moments of challenge or confrontation, pace becomes even more important. Emotional reactions often speed up speech. By consciously slowing down, you prevent emotion from hijacking the conversation. You create distance between feeling and response. That distance protects clarity. Pauses also protect you from saying too much. Silence gives you time to decide whether something needs to be said at all. Not every thought requires expression. Restraint strengthens communication. It keeps conversations focused rather than reactive. Listeners subconsciously associate pauses with confidence. Someone comfortable with silence appears self-assured. They do not rush to justify or explain themselves. They allow their words to stand on their own. That stillness can feel commanding without being aggressive. Pace helps manage interruptions. When you speak steadily and pause intentionally, interruptions feel more noticeable and often less frequent. Rushing invites interruption. Calm pacing discourages it. Pauses also improve listening. When you slow down, you are more present. You hear what the other person is actually saying instead of preparing your response. That presence improves the quality of your replies. In persuasive communication, pacing creates emphasis. Important points deserve space. When everything is said at the same speed, nothing stands out. Pauses highlight significance. They guide the listener's attention. Pace and pauses are not about theatrics. They are about intention. You do not pause to manipulate. You pause to allow meaning. You slow down to respect the conversation. Many people fear silence because they associate it with awkwardness. But silence is only awkward when it is unintentional. When used deliberately, silence feels purposeful. It signals composure. In professional settings, measured pacing conveys leadership. Leaders are not rushed by their own thoughts. They speak with clarity and control. Their pauses invite reflection and trust. In personal conversations, pacing communicates care. Slowing down shows that you value understanding over speed. It creates emotional safety. Pauses also allow you to observe. You can read body language, tone shifts, and reactions. That information helps you adjust your approach. Mastering pace requires awareness. Pay attention to how quickly you speak when nervous or excited. Practice slowing down intentionally. Allow pauses to exist without filling them. Over time, intentional pacing becomes natural. Conversations feel less draining, you feel more in control. Others respond differently. Pace and pauses do not dominate a conversation loudly, they guide it quietly. They turn ordinary words into deliberate communication. And when you learn to use them well, you discover that influence often lives not in what you say, but in the space you allow around it. Words alone do not create credibility. Behavior does. And one of the clearest behaviors that gives weight to your words is the presence of boundaries. When your boundaries are clear and consistently enforced, what you say becomes believable. When your boundaries are weak or inconsistent, even the strongest words lose their power. People listen differently when they know you mean what you say. Boundaries communicate that meaning. They show that your statements are not just preferences but standards. A boundary says, "This matters enough for me to act on it." That action is what turns language into authority. Without boundaries, words become suggestions. You may express discomfort but continue to tolerate the behavior. You may state expectations but accept repeated violations. Over time, people learn that your words carry no consequence. Credibility erodes not because you are unclear, but because your actions contradict your statements. Boundaries align your words with your values. When you set limits, you are not just managing others. You are reinforcing your own self-respect. That internal alignment shows externally. People sense when someone is grounded. That grounding makes communication stronger. Setting boundaries does not require aggression. In fact, aggressive boundaries often signal insecurity. True boundaries are calm and consistent. They do not need explanation or justification. They simply exist and are enforced through behavior. Calm enforcement communicates confidence. Boundaries also simplify communication. When expectations are clear, there is less room for confusion. You do not need to repeat yourself. You do not need to argue. The standard has already been set. That clarity reduces emotional friction. Credibility grows when people know what to expect from you. Boundaries create predictability. Predictability builds trust. Trust makes your words impactful. When people trust that you will follow through, they listen more closely. Boundaries protect you from overexplaining. Overexplaining often happens when boundaries are weak. You feel the need to justify why something matters. Strong boundaries remove that need. You state the limit and move on. In conversations, boundaries shape tone. When you know your limits, you speak more calmly. You are not negotiating your worth. You are expressing a position. That calmness reinforces credibility. Boundaries also filter relationships. People who respect them tend to engage more respectfully. People who resist them often reveal their intentions. That information is valuable. It helps you decide where to invest your energy. When boundaries are absent, resentment builds. Resentment leaks into communication as sarcasm, frustration, or withdrawal. Boundaries prevent that buildup. They keep communication clean. Credibility is also about consistency. Setting a boundary once is not enough. Consistent enforcement matters. When you enforce boundaries unevenly, people test them. Consistency teaches others how to treat you. Boundaries do not make you inflexible, they make you clear. You can adjust boundaries thoughtfully without abandoning them impulsively. Flexibility with intention maintains credibility. In leadership, boundaries are essential. Leaders who fail to set limits lose authority. Clear boundaries establish structure. Structure supports effective communication. Boundaries also protect emotional energy. When you are not drained, you communicate better. Fatigue weakens presence. Presence strengthens credibility. People often fear that boundaries will push others away. In reality, boundaries attract respect. They may repel those who benefited from your lack of limits, but they strengthen healthy connections. Boundaries demonstrate self-awareness. They show that you know your limits and honor them. That self-awareness is persuasive. Credibility is fragile. It builds slowly and erodes quickly. Boundaries help preserve it by aligning words with actions. When your boundaries are strong, you do not need to repeat yourself. You do not need to raise your voice. Your words stand on their own. Ultimately, boundaries give your language weight. They turn communication into commitment. When people see that you respect your own limits, they respect your words. And when your words are backed by boundaries, they carry credibility that cannot be argued away. Many people enter conversations quietly chasing approval without realizing it. They soften their words, over-explain their intentions, and compromise their boundaries, all in the hope of being liked or accepted. Approval feels comforting because it promises safety. But approval is unstable. It depends on moods, preferences, and agreement. Respect, on the other hand, is durable. It does not require agreement. It requires consistency, clarity, and self-respect. That is why the goal should always be respect, not approval. Approval asks the question, do you like me? Respect asks, do you take me seriously? Those two questions lead to very different behaviors. When approval is the goal, communication becomes cautious. You hesitate. You edit yourself mid-sentence. You prioritize harmony over honesty. When respect is the goal, communication becomes grounded. You speak with intention. You stand by your position. You allow discomfort without collapsing. Seeking approval often leads to inconsistency. You adjust your message depending on who is listening. You agree when you disagree. You say yes when you mean no. Over time, this erodes credibility. People may like you, but they do not rely on you. They sense the lack of firmness beneath the friendliness. Respect is built through alignment. Your words match your actions. Your boundaries are clear. Your tone is calm. You do not chase reactions. That alignment creates trust. Even when people disagree with you, they recognize your steadiness. Approval is fragile because it requires constant maintenance. One unpopular opinion can undo it. One firm boundary can threaten it. When your confidence depends on approval, you become reactive. You fear conflict. You avoid difficult conversations. That avoidance limits growth. Respect allows room for disagreement. It acknowledges that different perspectives can coexist. You do not need to convince everyone to validate your worth. You simply need to communicate with integrity. That integrity is what people ultimately respect. Chasing approval often leads to overcommunication. You explain yourself repeatedly, hoping clarity will earn acceptance. But overexplaining can signal insecurity. Respect grows when you say what you mean once clearly and allow it to stand. Respect also changes how you handle criticism. When approval matters most, criticism feels threatening. When respect matters most, criticism becomes information. You can evaluate it without personalizing it. You choose what to integrate and what to discard. People may not always like you when you prioritize respect. Setting boundaries, stating uncomfortable truths, or declining requests can create tension. But tension does not equal disrespect. In fact, many people respect those who can hold firm without hostility. Respect creates predictability. People know where you stand. They know what you will tolerate. That predictability builds trust. Trust strengthens influence. Approval-driven communication often leads to resentment. When you suppress your needs to please others, frustration builds internally. That frustration eventually leaks out in subtle ways. Respect-driven communication prevents that buildup by addressing issues directly. Respect is also self-directed. You cannot demand it from others if you do not practice it yourself. Self-respect shows in how you speak, how you listen, and how you set limits. Others respond to that energy. Approval may bring short-term comfort, but respect brings long-term stability. Relationships built on respect withstand disagreement. Relationships built on approval fracture under pressure. In professional settings, respect matters more than popularity. Leaders who seek approval avoid making hard decisions. Leaders who seek respect make thoughtful decisions, even when unpopular. That steadiness earns loyalty over time. Respect does not require emotional distance. You can be warm and respectful at the same time. Kindness and firmness are not opposites. They reinforce each other. Letting go of approval is liberating. You stop performing. You stop editing yourself for safety. You communicate honestly and calmly. That authenticity resonates. Some people may withdraw when you stop seeking approval. That loss can feel uncomfortable. But it often reveals relationships that depended on compliance rather than mutual respect. When respect is the goal, your communication becomes simpler. You say less, but you mean more. You listen without fear. You speak without apology. Respect also protects your peace. You are no longer at the mercy of external validation. Your confidence becomes internal. In the end, approval is a fleeting reward. Respect is a lasting foundation. When you communicate with clarity, boundaries, and composure, you may not be liked by everyone, but you will be taken seriously. And being taken seriously opens doors that approval never could.